take out a motivational treat for myself. Welcome back, everybody. My name's Rachel, and this is my book club. Demons, immortals, angels, vampires. There's a lot. Which, while I do get it, I don't get it. I know we're already halfway into July, but that's okay. We're going to talk about the best books that I've read so far this year. So far, I have rated 7 books as 5 stars, and I'm going to talk about each of those books and why I love them. All of these books I rated 5 stars for a lot of reasons that we'll talk about, but all of these books have kind of stuck with me in different ways, so I'm really excited to get to kind of revisit them and talk about them with you guys. The first book I want to talk about is Beach Read by Emily Henry. I have read now 3 books by Emily Henry this year. I've read Book Lovers, People We Meet on Vacation, and Beach Read, and I just started listening to Happy Place as well. There is something that I find really comforting about listening to Julia Whelan narrate Emily Henry's books on Audible. I don't know. I find myself really vibing with Emily Henry's books as audiobooks. I've really been enjoying that. But Beach Read is the book that has really struck a chord with me so far. I did a video on all of the Emily Henry books that I have read, but this one is just above and beyond. This book follows the romance between Augustus Everett and January Andrews. And January and Gus are both kind of a mess when we meet them in this book, and we get to watch January and Gus's relationship develop as they both kind of deal with things that are going on in their own lives and learning how they can be together. And I was just so moved by this book. I related so terribly to the kind of hopelessness that they were both feeling at different points. January especially is going through a lot of things in her life, and she has a lot of questions that she doesn't really know the answer to. And there was just something so powerful about them being able to find a way to love each other despite all of the things that they feel are holding them back personally. This story is about them being able to work through that, and then seeing January change her relationship not only with Gus but as well as with her family. And I just found this book so powerful. Without any spoilers, I think that if you are not into romance, it can be hard to find something that you like, but this book is so hard-hitting. I just don't know how this could not be 5 stars. So Beach Read for me is a romance that is 5 stars, no notes, flawless, easy read, and just wonderful. Next up, I want to talk about Dark Age by Pierce Brown. So this is book, I always have to look to make sure. This is book 5 in the Red Rising series. If you like sci-fi, I think Red Rising is a phenomenal series. It is the epitome of everything that sci-fi should be, in my opinion, where it keeps on track with political issues, cultural differences. There's, technology and all sorts of wild stuff going on, and I think Pierce Brown does a phenomenal job of writing about all these problems in a really inventive way. All of the war machines and stuff that they have in this future is insane, and it's just so well written. And this for me has been my favorite book in the whole series so far. It's the only one that's made me really cry. Normally with these more masculine sci-fi books, I don't find myself, crying. As much as I've been upset at, certain characters dying, these terrible things are happening, it's very emotional, but this book made me sob. And like I said in the beginning, all of these books have something that will stick with me, and I have a passage saved towards the end of this book where I actually experienced a small emotional breakdown, and I will never forget the experience of reading the last 30% of this book and everything that has culminated to what happens at the end of this book. Again, if you have not read Red Rising, you need to. Every single Red Rising book is a banger in its own right, and the story and the characters develop so well, and I am just amped to read Lightbringer, and I don't even know if it will be able to live up to everything that happens in this book, but we'll see. Pierce Brown has not disappointed me yet, and all of these books have been 4 or 5 stars for me. Iron Gold, I think, is the only book in the series I rated 4 stars, just because I was struggling to get back into the universe and there's just some things I didn't enjoy quite as much, but it was still awesome. It was still epic. There's just an incredible overlap between the way that the story is written in the sci-fi genre that makes it such a powerful and impactful story. And it is one of the best written, I say this every time I talk about this series, but Pierce Brown writes the best action I think I've ever read, especially in sci-fi, with the kind of use of tools you can have with sci-fi technology and stuff like that. It's just amazing, right? So if I could recommend you any romance, it'd be Beach Read. If I could recommend you any sci-fi, it would be Red Rising for sure. 5 stars, incredible, love, love, love. On that note, for me, I have the pleasure of reading what I would consider the epitome of fantasy, which is the last book in the Eragon series, Inheritance. Everyone and their mom has read Eragon, I guess, and whenever I talk about it, I find out that I'm just so late to the game. I know the series has been around for a long time, and so obviously being such a bestseller and being a series from quite a while ago, everyone has read it. I'm late to the game, that's okay. I still enjoyed it. This series has actually really promoted me to get more into classical fantasy adventure stories. I never read Lord of the Rings. I love the movies, and more than ever after finishing this book do I want to read Lord of the Rings, just so I can be immersed once again into such a phenomenal world of all of the fantasy books I've ever read, which is more than any genre for me. Christopher Paolini writes the best visuals I have ever read. There is something so magical about the way he describes the world and the people and the different races that live in Alagasia, and it's so unmatched magically for me. I have never read a series so magical and captivating. Like, somehow I can read so many 800-page books. This whole series is great. This To Sleep in a Sea of Stars that he released, amazing. The books are so long, but the visuals that he writes are unmatched. If you have not read any Christopher Paolini, you should, just to know the feeling of losing yourself in a story. Everything about this is great. Obviously the whole series is focusing on Eragon, a humble farm boy who finds a dragon egg in the forest outside of his very small town home. And whatever events and great evils and wars and adventures await for this dragon rider. It's just wonderful. It is a timeless kind of story where it is epic, adventurous, and magical. It is so immersive. The reason that this book continues to sell a bajillion million copies all the time is because this kind of story will never age. It will never get old. It will never do anything wrong. I think the conclusion to this series was about as perfect as it possibly could have been. I did cry at the end of this, which was surprising for me, again, because such a high fantasy, immersive, adventurous story where it is focusing so much on the world and you have this very grand plot. I think sometimes I do feel slightly disconnected just because of how grand the story and the world is. Some of the emotions for me can kind of get lost in that, and reading something so fantastical that I'm not relating to as much. And again, having a male main character and stuff like that, sometimes it's harder for me to get emotionally involved. Still cried. Heartbroken. So sad. This is one of those series that I know I will remember forever because it is so wonderful. The thing that I really like is the whole premise is that Eragon is going to have to face this greater evil, the King Galbatorix, and you know, he's this big evil ruler who's been alive for centuries and he's bad, right? You have your perfect epitome of evil villain in this series. But I feel like the conclusion to that confrontation against Galbatorix that we've been working up to over all these books happens not early in the book by any means, but there's still enough of the book left after that big confrontation for us to really be sad. There's so much story that still happens afterwards that really wraps up the series in a very somber way. And for me, that is one of the biggest reasons that this will stick with me, is all of the goodbyes that Christopher Paolini allowed us to have at the end of this book was unreal. I just finished this book yesterday, so I am still a little fresh from that end of series depression that I'm experiencing. But I was going to jump into another book right away after this. I should have known better, but I think I laid in bed and just like watched TikToks for probably an hour just to decompress. And I'm sure you all know that feeling when you finish a series that you've loved so much, where it's so sad to have to end it. And this is exactly what that was for me. Aragon is pretty much a flawless series. I'm definitely looking at getting into more classical high fantasy stories after finishing this series. That was a lot longer than I intended to talk about that one, but again, the wounds are fresh. Okay, this book I read in January. This is the first book I gave 5 stars this year, In the Lives of Puppets by TJ Klune. Such a good book. I cannot wait to read more TJ Klune. I have had House in the Cerulean Sea on my wish list for way too long. I just need to buy it. In the Lives of Puppets is following Victor. Victor is the last human alive in the world in a society of robots, right? All of these AI and very humanoid robots are now all that is left of humanity. There are no other people. And this book is essentially a retelling of Pinocchio, but as a sci-fi book. And I found this book very creative and just so ingenious at the concept of this story where Victor is discovering his humanity on this adventure to save his AI robot dad who's been kidnapped-ish. And the plot is very hard to explain without spoiling too much. But Victor is going on this adventure with his robot found family, right? He has these robots that he's found in the junkyard and saved, and he's bringing them on this adventure to save what is their dad in this family structure from the great city of robots. And Victor has been hidden in this forest with his little found family for so long because Victor, being a human, should not be found out, lest he be kidnapped and experimented on and whatever. And being the only human in this robot world, Victor doesn't really understand his feelings. He doesn't understand his body in the way that he should, because there's no one to teach him. And even, the robots around him and his father figure who has raised him only has so much understanding of what it's like to be human. So much of this book is also very tangled, right? As Rapunzel is taking her first steps outside of her tower, and she learns so much about the world and so much about herself, who she can be and what she can have. That is very much that same coming of age storyline that Victor has in this book. There are so many great quotes that really highlight so many good things about what we feel as humans and what makes our emotions so powerful and also so useful to us, and also just that sometimes you feel things and you experience things and you just have to accept it. And there's so much that happens and develops in that story. It's so good. I think this book is actually probably really underrated because the premise of it definitely will not appeal to everyone. The genre and the way that the story is told, there's a lot of things that could make this book not for you, but the underlying story, the reason that this is so good, despite if this kind of writing and genre is for you, it is that universal human experience of learning about yourself that makes this so powerful. I don't know if anything I just said made any sense. To sum it up, this book is phenomenal, caught me by surprise, hilarious, a wonderful thing to just read and experience, and I'm really excited to read The House in the Cerulean Sea because I see nothing but good things about that book as well. Next up, this book is definitely gonna be in the running for my favorite book of the year. Is Masters of Death by Olivia Blake. And of course I did do a video about this book too. This book, I read this in February. I still think about this book constantly. After I read this book, I realized that not everyone loves Olivia Blake, which while I do get it, I don't get it. There is no world where I don't love Olivia Blake. If Olivia Blake has no devoted fans, then I am dead. In Masters of Death, we're following a gang of people, creatures, demons, immortals, angels, vampires. There's a lot. There is a lot of creatures in this book. Something that's really interesting is there is a lot of fantasy that could have been in this book. This could have been written as a very lengthy, high fantasy, immersive kind of story. But Olivia Blake writes her books very character focused, so there's not a ton of world building, and there's also not a lot of plot, which again is not for everybody, but it is for me. So we have our main characters. I love this art. Everyone should love and appreciate this art. So here we have Cal and Mayra and Brant and Fox. Hold on. Look at the cover also. I love this book so much. And then we have Thomas Parker IV, Viola, and Iris. And so these are the main characters that we're following as they are trying to find Death, who has been kidnapped in this gambling game where the only rule is don't lose, blah, 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 blah. I would explain it to you, but I already did a video on that. It's very vague. This whole plot is very enigmatic, you could say. And it can be really hard to follow because the plot is actually not the point. The point of this story is that we're following our main group of people, and they all have very complicated relationships with each other. Each relationship in this story represents kind of a different stage of love, a different past with the person that they're trying to be with, and there's a lot of complicated relationships between them, and that is the point of the story, is that we get to see how love comes forward and really does conquer all. Again, I don't have time to get into the details and it's very hard to explain without spoiling, but the romantic and poetic writing that takes place in the way that we learn about our characters and who they are and what they stand for and what they mean to each other is written so well. I was so emotionally gripped by the characters, and the plot was interesting. It was not the point, but it was so interesting. And I've never read anything like this. I think about this book constantly. I love this book. I might reread this soon, actually, now that I'm talking about it. Now that I'm talking about it and I'm trying to remember it and I'm realizing there are some things that I've forgotten, I'm gonna have to reread this book. I love this book. The cover is beautiful. The art on the inside is beautiful. The story within is beautiful. This has to be one of the best books I've ever read in my entire life. That is actually not an exaggeration. I love this book. And it is, again, this is definitely going to be in the running for best book of the year. My only advice is, I understand that not everyone loves Olivia Blake. Some people really cannot get on board with her writing style, which is fine. If it's not for you, it's not for you. But if you read even like the first chapter or two and you are interested in the way that it's written, then I think you will love it. This book is perfect. This book is perfect. And Olivia Blake has very, very quickly become one of my favorite authors for all of the reasons aforementioned in this video. I want to have this book dipped in an acrylic brick so I can preserve it forever. Time for another chocolate. And of course, up next then is the Atlas 6, also by Olivia Blake. So the Atlas 6 is the first book in this series, the Atlas 6 series. And of course I had to read this because I loved Masters of Death so much. I had to read something else and I saw a lot of really good things about this series. So this is a fantasy dark academia series, right? About the Atlas 6, where this guy, Atlas, mysterious mentor man, picks 6 very powerful magicians, right? So we're in this world where people have varying levels of magical abilities. Some people show kind of no signs, some people are telepaths, some people can manipulate like plants and nature, while others can manipulate, solid objects and do something like telekinesis. Why do I always get the words confused? There's one where you can read minds, and there's ones where you can move things with your mind. Those Can't think of the words right now. Not important. But you have this world of many people with many abilities, and there's a lot of really interesting magical systems in place. The world building in this one is a lot better than in Masters of Death, and a lot of it I think is just due to the fact that this is a series, so we do need that context to understand both our characters and what's going on, because there's a lot more depth to be considered when it comes to the magic systems and when it comes to the overarching story. However, just like in Masters of Death, the main focus is on what's happening between the 6 main characters. So in this book, the 6 magicians that are picked, it is Nick, Libby, Parisa, Callum, Tristan, and Reyna. So we're following these 6 chosen ones on this initiation into the Library of Alexandria. From the get-go, we know from reading the back of the book that one of them has to die at the end of this. Bum, bum, bum. But our characters do not know that. They are initiated into this society being told that one of them will be eliminated at the end of this period. You must choose between the 6 of you who will be eliminated, right? Very eerie. Great dark academia vibes. Something I really like about this series is we do get more with the magic system, but it's still vague enough that not only are you continually interested in how the magic will evolve in the story, but also it keeps the focus on the 6 characters. And again, that is how Olivia Blake writes. Each of our characters is very flawed and selfish in their own way. Libby and Nick are both kind of just little dummies. They are both kind of more on the gifted kid side, where they're there to prove their worth and see how far they can push their abilities, where they've graduated together and they've been like school rivals forever because they're both incredibly powerful magicians who can manipulate. They're called, I think, physicists, or they can do physical magic where they can move objects and matter with their mind. It's very cool. I cannot explain how cool the magic is in this series. And then you have Parisa, who is just, she's a bad bitch. She's a telepath. That's the word I was looking for. Telepath. But Parisa is a telepath, and so she has grown to use her looks to her advantage and to really be able to manipulate other people around her, because she can read their thoughts, and she can read other people's thoughts a lot better than others, right? So there's something about the talent that's spoken a lot, where people like telepaths, some people can just get like intentions or inklings, some people can read full thoughts, some people can only do it when they're very nearby, so on and so on. And so Parisa is a very powerful telepath. Then you have Callum. Callum is an empath, which, if I'm gonna throw in an opinion, empath has to be the worst ability, just as far as like personal well-being. Callum is unwell. So being an empath means that you can not only feel the emotions of people around you, but also manipulate the emotions of people around you. And Callum, being so powerful, can manipulate others' emotions so strongly that he could actually convince you to do something. He can make your emotions feel so strongly that you would be so sad as to harm another person, or you could be so happy as to always want to be by Callum. That aspect of his manipulation that is never really clear if it's in play or not. It's always assumed that he's manipulating you, but he rarely ever says it outright. And then you have Reyna is a naturalist, so she can control plants. She can make a seed sprout into a full-grown tree with the wave of her hand. And then you have Tristan. Tristan is the most interesting character because we never get a full scope of his abilities in the first book. You start to see a lot of potential with what he can do, but it's never really outright laid out what he can do or what he could potentially do or why Atlas picked him in the first place, because in the beginning he seems quite useless. And so all throughout this book, we're watching them interact with each other, and they're all trying to manipulate each other in different ways and trying to do things so that way they can be the one to move forward in this society and not be the one that's eliminated. While the premise of the story is not necessarily unique, as far as like dark academia joining a cultish society and some of you will die. That story has been told and will continue to be told in dark academia for all of time because it's a great premise. But the way this was executed, I think was super unique. The magic system is so cool. The magic system in this book is so cool, and I am just so hyped, and I hate Parisa. And I really like Nick and Tristan, but also some of the things going on between them is very like, ooh. I think I will never be able to explain Olivia Blake's books very well, especially in this situation where I'm not going to give you any spoilers, but this story is insane. And I am a character-driven reader, which is another one of the reasons that I really like Olivia Blake's books. Another critique a lot of people give her, not only about her wild word choice and long sentences and her general syntax, but also the way she writes her characters is they're all very self-absorbed and they all have like, oh no, I'm the main character energy. Don't know what the word I'm looking for is. Her characters are all pretty much narcissistic, actually, and they're all snotty in their own way and sassy, but I really like that. A lot of people say they don't like the way she writes her characters. I just can't agree. I love it. I just think I will never not be obsessed with how Olivia Blake writes, and I also think I started off with 2 of her best books from what I've seen on some other reviews. And I think the uniqueness of how this story was executed is why this got 5 stars for me, because I love the way she writes. I think the characters are so interesting. I don't read a lot of dark academia, so the premise in this book and this story is still very new and exciting. I am just so intrigued. I am so intrigued by the characters that she writes, and everything is always so vague and clouded as far as the plot goes, and it just works so well for me personally as a reader. I don't really have much else to say because I haven't finished the series yet, so I don't have any closing thoughts yet, but first book was a banger. 5 stars, easily, phenomenal, bang, 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 perfect. I loved it. And lastly, this is a big book, actually. This is a bigger book than I remember it being. Crooked Kingdom. I also made a video about this, 6 of Crows and Crooked Kingdom. I think 6 of Crows is the best duology I have read and will very likely be the best YA series I will ever read. Now, there is lots of great YA books out there, so many, right? That genre deserves all of the hype that it gets, I think. I love YA books. I think there's a lot of potential with YA books, and I think the nice thing about that genre is it can go in a lot of directions and still be classified as YA. But this series is probably one of the most unique series I've ever read as far as the world that was being built and kind of the time frame it's trying to be set in, as well as our 6 of Crows characters who are little teenage gangsters. The whole premise of the story is amazing, and I really liked Shadow and Bone. I thought that series was good too, but I think Shadow and Bone was a great stepping stone and a great foundation for what 6 of Crows became as the series later on in the same universe. I just think that this book did a lot with a lot of classic YA ideas and then brought them into a world and into very unique situations where you have our group of gangsters who are trying to pull these heists and all of their individual traumas that have led them to this life of crime on the streets, and the way that the system has failed them and the way that they are going out into the world and inadvertently fixing the wrongs of things even though they're criminal. The whole thing is so wonderfully done, and in my opinion, 6 of Crows is truly a piece of art. I am amazed at Leigh Bardugo's creativity. 6 of Crows is just one of the most unique stories I've ever read, and it's written amazingly well, and that's really all you can ask for. Great world building, great characters, unique plot ideas, and powerful, hard-hitting backstories, and interesting plot lines, as well as interesting subplots and character development. 6 of Crows ticks every box you could even think of for a book to be good. Like, I truly think this series is flawless. And if you don't like this series, then I think you are confused. There is not a single sane person in this world who could dislike this duology. And I will think about this forever. And the show was good too. The show Shadow and Bone was surprisingly good. I really thought it was going to be bad. A lot of shows that they base off of YA books especially are usually not very good. But Shadow and Bone I really enjoyed it. And the series is so good. I will always remember Kaz and Inej forever. Kaz and Inej forever. Amen. And voila, that is the 7 books that I have rated 5 stars this year so far. I'm really happy that you guys have been here to watch this video because I love nothing more than 30 minutes of me just getting to talk about everything I love about books and reading. I'm always so grateful that I get to share these experiences with you guys. I love to see your comments and what you think about the books or when you give me other suggestions. You guys are phenomenal. So thanks again for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you can see more videos from me. Don't forget to add me on Goodreads so I can see what you're reading, and I'll see y'all next time.